Bringing his brand to Davos, President Trump shakes up geopolitics again. Some called it a tough act to follow after Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney gave a much-lauded speech. But the U.S. president proceeded to remind Ottawa and other allies that they must be grateful for the United States. So can and will U.S. hegemony really be challenged? I'm Andrea Sankey, and this is the Newsmakers. Like so much over the last year, many people were left bewildered by U.S. President Trump's speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Arguably, one upside was Trump backing off the threat of using military force to take Greenland, though some question whether that was actually sincere. Still, after 2 days of world leaders speaking from the WEF podium, what stood out to many was the message from non-superpowers like France and Canada saying they will not be bullied and that middle countries need to stick together. But is the U.S. just too big a military and economic power for those positions to matter? Here's a look.
A very cold shoulder, no welcoming party in sight for the U.S. president. He cut a solitary figure as he strode from his helicopter to the 2026 World Economic Forum in Davos in Switzerland. Weeks of saber rattling and US threats to acquire Greenland dominated discussions and set the tone in the lead up to the summit. But in the president's long speech, a noticeable shift.
It's the United States alone that can protect this giant mass of land, this giant piece of ice, develop it and improve it and make it so that it's good for Europe and safe for Europe and good for us. And that's the reason I'm seeking immediate negotiations to once again discuss the acquisition of Greenland by the United States.
Several times he confused Greenland with neighbouring Iceland. But many world leaders noticed the emphasis on insisting a return to negotiations seemed to suggest a backdown on promises of military annexation.
I won't do that. Okay? Now everyone's saying, oh, good. That's probably the biggest statement I made, because people thought I would use force. I don't have to use force. I don't want to use force. I won't use force.
Listening intently to his speech, another American figure, California Governor Gavin Newsom, a vocal critic of Trump, widely believed to be a Democratic contender for president in the 2028 election.
You learned nothing. There was nothing offered there. It was at times boorish, but even by Trump standards, ish. So it was just remarkable in its inconsequential nature. I expected more from him. I really did.
The Danish foreign minister and many others noticing the US president's backpedaling.
The day ends better than it started, because this morning we had a president who still did not want to deal with whether he might take Greenland by force. And we had a president who wanted to start a customs war against Europe. And now he has given a speech where he says, I will not take Greenland by force.
Ever the dealmaker, President Trump spoke of deals being hashed out with the head of NATO.
It's a deal that people jumped at. Really fantastic for the USA. Gets everything we wanted, including especially real national security.
Does it still include the United States having ownership of Greenland like you've said you wanted?
It's a long-term deal. It's the ultimate long-term deal. And I think it puts everybody in a really good position, especially as it pertains to security and minerals and everything else.
One of the bigger things to come out of Davos, at least according to NATO General Secretary Mark Rutte, was agreement on preventing the Chinese and Russians from gaining access either economically or militarily to Greenland. But he said a deal on Greenland isn't final and was scant with details.
Mr. Rutte, is it a good deal? Is it a good deal?
I think it's a very good meeting tonight, but still a lot of work to be done. But I've got to run.
So a potential US annexation averted, tariffs against 8 European countries shelved, and global stock markets bouncing back. But the erosion of trust between Europe and the US continues.
So where are key geopolitical relationships heading? Judging from the complicated landscape on display now in Davos. Well, joining me to debate that and more are from Washington, Director of Global Affairs at Nest Point Associates and Republican political strategist Tim Phillips. From London, Professor of International Relations at the London School of Economics and Political Science, Fawaz Garges. And from Copenhagen, political commentator and journalist Anne-Sophie Alarp. Thank you all so much for being with me. Anne-Sophie, I'll begin with you. And first, speak to us as a Dane. Does Denmark at least feel more at ease now after Trump's speech yesterday saying he won't use military force to take Greenland and tariffs have been pushed aside, at least for now?
I think yesterday was a really good day. It was also a show of how diplomacy can do a lot of good for both Europe, but also the world. I think the speech was reassuring to many Danes, also to people in Greenland who are the people on the territory. And I think we were generally apprehensive, but a little bit relieved.
Okay. I mean, do you chalk that all up to diplomatic pressure that he succumbed to? And I mean, do you think now the middle powers, as Mark Carney actually put it, like Denmark, are learning better to deal with his personality instead of taking the traditional diplomatic approach as they would have?
I think Alexander Stubb, the president of Finland, put it pretty well yesterday at a panel. He said there are two schools of thought. One says de-escalate, the other one says escalate to de-escalate. I think what happened yesterday was a show of soft diplomacy and warm hands greeting the American president. And that style of diplomacy definitely delivered. Possibly it delivered because there had been a sense of unity between the European countries and the European members of the NATO alliance against Trump, so that there had been pressure build up. But I think the NATO Secretary General played a very big part yesterday.
Fawaz, what's your take? I mean, do you think this is now kind of heading in the right direction? There's a sense of understanding, or is there really just too much boiling under the surface, especially when you hear speeches like the Canadian Prime Minister saying we shouldn't go along to get along, compliance won't buy us safety. These aren't traditional diplomatic lines you would have used if everything were being understood in a traditional sense.
I think what we have seen in the past 24 hours is that President Trump climbed down. He has climbed down from the tree because he realized there is almost relative consensus in Europe to resist his attempt to basically own Greenland or seize Greenland. And also, I think there is domestic opposition within the Republican Party in the United States. So the convergence of European resistance and opposition within the Republican Party and the Democratic parties basically forced President Trump to climb down. Just for your audience, this president respects power, respects strengths. Europe, for the past 1 year or so, has been really trying to flatter Donald Trump. They have tried to basically kill him with kisses. And they finally realized that Donald Trump does not respect except the strong and accept basically resistance. Even the United Kingdom basically made it very clear. The Prime Minister Starmer, where I am, he made it very clear that he will never go along with the seizure or even the ownership of Greenland, and the principle of sovereignty, Danish sovereignty over Greenland was sacred.
Okay.
So I think for now, you're going to see President Trump basically moving into an entirely different thing, because we have seen him before I don't think Greenland will be prioritized in the next few weeks and next few months by Donald Trump.
Okay. Let me ask Tim then what you make of it. Do you believe Trump actually climbed down? And there's also the argument on the other side that Greenland isn't necessarily the true priority here. It's on the agenda, but it's also a distraction. And he's succeeding with that because of putting Greenland at the top. He didn't have to talk about what happened in Venezuela, other threats that were made, tariffs, et cetera. What do you think?
I think the president very much believes Greenland is important to the national security of not just the United States, but of NATO, and that China and Russia represent a threat. With the climate change that's happening, we're seeing the shipping lanes staying open in that part of the world a lot longer. So it does matter. The president knows that. I think that when he makes statements sometimes, he overstates on purpose. We have a saying in the United States, take him seriously, not always literally. And so he presses. If he finds resistance that is strong or united, then he can always take a step back while still moving toward the general direction that he and his team think is best. And I think that's what is happening here. I think the NATO alliance is durable, even at this moment with some of the disagreements and some of the language that's being used by different folks. It's a durable alliance. I also think the other thing President Trump wants is for NATO member countries in the European Union to actually spend enough to defend themselves. That's a constant frustration, not just for President Trump and Republicans, but for a lot of Americans. And one of the strategic goals of this administration has been to get the NATO members to actually spend enough to defend themselves and not always have to rely on the American umbrella in Europe.
And they have spent more. He's repeated that time and time again, that's one of his great policy successes. But let me ask Anne-Sophie, because there are those who support Trump that are now saying, you know, countries like Canada, for example, and maybe even Denmark are, you know, choosing to be subservient to China, actually, rather than the United States in order to combat Trump's aggressive style. And whether they like it or not, the U.S. is still the better or safer choice. What do you make of that?
Well, definitely Denmark remains committed to the transatlantic, both defense alliance and NATO, but also relationship. We're very loyal and good friend to the US, and there's no question as to where our sympathies or loyalties would orient themselves. We have a long-standing relationship diplomatically with the U.S. In terms of defense. We have a very strong bond. Also, we fought alongside the U.S. in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and I think also in terms of just organization, a very strong defense ties to the U.S. And politically, a lot of Danes have a strong veneration when it comes to the US. So hopefully this is a skirmish and something that can be repaired.
Okay.
Certainly we are affording the US every type of cooperation, also on Greenland, access to the territory, every opportunity business-wise, and also on Danish soil. The US has full access also in terms of their military. So this has been very confounding. I think it's been very confusing to us as a nation.
Indeed. Yeah, confusing is the word. And speaking of which, Fawaz, you know, the agenda moved on today to the Gaza Board of Peace that Trump has created. Some remarked that instead of looking like a diplomatic alignment to bring peace to Gaza, it looked more like a kind of a private investment board to redevelop the region and get money into it. And he mentioned as much. What do you make of this new line today out of Davos, and where you think the Gaza Peace Board is going and why?
Well, I wish I had had a clear answer for you and for your audience. I don't think anyone has a clear answer. I don't think anyone can read President Trump's mind. I don't think anyone understands what really Donald Trump, whether he has strategy or not. Before I talk about basically the so-called board of peace, let's keep in mind that a rift has already been basically created between the United States and Europe. There is no longer any trust, and these are not my words. European leaders have made it very clear that historically speaking, the American president's word was used to be called gold. Now it's junk. This president is unpredictable, unreliable, not just for me, for European leaders, unhinged, temperamental. He changes his mind at a whim, whether you're talking about the Riviera of the Middle East, Gaza, or now about Greenland. So the reality is, the question is not whether damage has been done, the extent of the damage between the United States and Europe, and how long will it take for European leaders to trust the word of the president, because trust is really basically the most important currency among allies and friends and partners. The board of peace. The president says the United Nations, the Security Council, basically authorized the establishment of the board of peace regarding Gaza, turning the ceasefire into permanent ceasefire and then peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. President Trump now wants to turn the so-called board of peace into a parallel institution to the United Nations. And that's why the United Kingdom, France, other major European nations have decided not to join the board of peace because they really do not know what the mandate of the board of peace is. And the president keeps saying, and I am at a loss, I'm a specialist on the Middle East, keeps saying there is peace in the Middle East. I don't see, show me where's the peace in the Middle East. Since the ceasefire was signed in October, more than 400 Palestinians have been killed, including 100 children. Gaza continues no major humanitarian aid. So again, the rhetoric is one thing, and the actions and the reality on the ground are another.
Okay. Tim, I'll tell you what, I'd like to go back to the first part of Fawaz's answer with you, because as he calls President Trump unhinged, unpredictable, you say he should be taken seriously, though not literally. I really have to ask you, as a Republican strategist, and seeing him, so strongly on the global stage right now, he is on televisions absolutely around the world. Is it okay for you to see him in this state where, for years he was going into Joe Biden being befuddled and too old for office, and now we hear him confusing countries like Iceland and Greenland. He can't figure out the actual name of Azerbaijan, calling Armenia Albania. Comedians are making a lot of fun of it. It's great material for them, but how does it make you feel as a strategist trying to help this party when these are the kinds of fundamental mistakes being made in these speeches getting so much publicity?
Politicians make gaffes all the time, whether it's Barack Obama or George W. Bush or Donald Trump. They're on the stage with the green light going, so they're going to make mistakes. And I think most Americans look at him and they do not look for some beautiful speech out of President Trump. They look for strong leadership. They look for, do they think he can help move our economy forward? And the answer is, so far, yes. We have over 4% gross domestic product growth, GDP growth in the last 2 quarters. That's dramatically more than most of the rest of the developed world. They see a southern border that was open and millions of illegal people swarmed in, many of them criminals. It's been closed. So they're really finished with politicians who make lovely speeches but then don't actually perform or do anything. So the American people, it's a new era we're in. I think we've lost trust in the political class. They lost the trust of the American people. And so a lot of the niceties and the polite language that was the norm, and I think that's a good thing to have a norm like that, they've been moved aside because they saw a failure of the political class in the United States from both parties. And President Trump is a reaction to that. And so that would be my answer.
Okay.
They're looking for results. They're not really looking, Americans, they're not as much looking for polite niceties anymore because their governing class, in their opinion, and I agree with the American people's opinion, they were failed by their governing class in both parties.
Okay.
With regard to how we move forward, Europe and the United States, I think that it's been an alliance, certainly since World War II, that has been durable, as I mentioned a moment ago. And I think it will be durable in the weeks and months ahead. There's too many threats, whether it's Russia moving through Ukraine and wanting more, or whether it's China, which has a voracious appetite for greater power as well. There's too much on the line, I believe, for disagreements like we've seen in these last few weeks to somehow hold up cooperation.
Okay, let me just ask Anne-Sophie, though, quickly, because you heard the analysis there coming from an American domestic market, but how did you feel watching this from a foreign audience, especially when it's your country that he was kind of threatening to invade that didn't really seem clear on the name of it? I mean, how does that make you feel? Does it make you more nervous? Do you find it comical? Because when you speak about diplomacy, language is everything.
It's true. I think at this time, I think most of us are used to the American president and how he behaves and how he speaks. What we've not been used to is the level of threats that we have been subjected to during the last weeks. And that has been quite unsettling. Our foreign minister, Lars Løkke Rasmussen, he said recently on Fox that there's always a grain of truth to what the president says. And I think we can meet each other between the US administration and the Danes and people in Greenland in the fact that the Arctic is a very important strategic point. Any attack on the US would come through the Arctic if it would be from the east of Russia, for instance. The Arctic is strategic in terms of minerals, but also there has been, and that is within the constitutional framework within the Kingdom of Denmark, there is some uncertainty as to the political future of Greenland because Greenland has a strong independence movement politically. So there's always some sense to what he says also, as long as you look closely enough.
Fawaz, you've been waiting to get in. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, several points, but quickly, I know time is precious. First of all, including today, show very clearly that President Trump has a very dwindling favorability rate. Almost 50% of Americans think that he's doing a bad job. The public information today, major surveys, more and more Americans realize that basically inflation is hitting him in the pocketbook. And even though he's delivering for his multi-billionaires and the super rich, obviously he's not delivering for the common people in the United States. And the midterm election will show in the next few months that most probably the American public will punish President Trump's basically, he came to power on the premise that nation building at home. We see him now talking about Venezuela, Greenland, Canada, and on and on and on. Secondly, I don't think really President Trump recognizes the damage that he has done, not only for the reputation and the standing of the United States and the world, but in fact, now one of the leading headlines in the newspapers in the United States, China wins as President Trump seizes control of the liberal, democratic, capitalist system. I mean, imagine Canada now basically made the pilgrim to China. And basically they're talking about a multilateral world where China is a leading member of the international system. And Starmer is going this week to China as well. China is winning because President Trump is pushing his own allies to basically redraw their economic and their political strategies as a result of President Trump weaponizing integration and weaponizing tariffs and global trade. And finally, it seems to me really the word that help us to understand what President Trump has done so far is rupture. And the word rupture was used by the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney when he said, what we are seeing in the world today is a real rupture, not only in relation between the United States and its European and Western allies, but in the very nature of the international system.
Right.
So in this particular sense, I think, President Trump really has basically brought about major changes in international economics and international politics.
Okay, Fawaz, that will have to be, unfortunately, the final word for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank sincerely all three of my panelists so much for being with us, and our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.